They said my daughter ran away with another man, but her shoes were left on my porch facing the wrong direction, soaked in dew and blood. That's how I knew they were lying. You can tell when a lie has bones, it stands too perfectly, too rehearsed. But the real truth, always limps. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the old gravel road where she'd driven away hours earlier. The moonlight trembled across the fields like it was afraid to touch this house. Then sometime after midnight, I heard an engine idling, a door shutting too fast, and a sound like something heavy being dropped on wood. When I opened the door there, they were her white shoes. They weren't placed. They were thrown. One lay upright, the other on its side, a faint smear of red on the toe, the kind of red that isn't lipstick. I remember picking them up and feeling the cold through the soles, as if they still carried the weight of her steps. The next morning, Preston's family arrived at my house, all smiles and concern, the kind that's painted on. His mother, Diane, wrapped her scarf tighter and said, "Elaine, please don't overreact. Clara just needed space." You know how emotional young women can be. Her voice was too smooth, her perfume too strong. Her husband, the retired banker everyone in town admired, stood in my kitchen like he owned it, sipping the coffee I'd made only because my hands needed something to do. Then Preston himself walked in, my son-in-law calm, composed, wearing the same black jacket he'd worn the night before. There was a scratch on his hand, a thin line of blood drying near his thumb. He saw me notice it and smiled. "She'll come back, Mom," he said softly like he'd just consoled a child. She always does. I wanted to scream that she wasn't the type to run away. My Clara had a heart too loyal for that. She just started teaching literature at the community college. She'd call me every evening, no matter how tired she was. She'd never spend a night without telling me where she was. Never. But I didn't scream. I just asked, if she ran away, why didn't she take her shoes? No one answered. They called the police before I could. Preston did the talking. I watched him. His voice calm, his tone rehearsed. "Yes, officer. My wife's been under stress. Maybe she went back to an old friend. No, she didn't take her car. No bags, just left." The officer nodded sympathetically, taking notes while looking at me like I was the hysterical mother who'd lost her mind. When he left, Diane touched my shoulder and said, "Elaine, darling, please rest. Obsessing won't bring her back." That word obsessing burned into me, because it wasn't obsession, it was instinct. It's what wakes you at night when your child has a fever miles away. It's what makes you pick up the phone before the bad news comes. It's what tells you in a voice that no one else can hear that something terrible has happened. That night, I put Clara's shoes on the table and just stared at them. I thought of the last time I saw her wearing them, a sunny afternoon, when she came home with a bag of groceries, laughing about the stray dog that had followed her from the bus stop. She said, "Mom, these shoes are cursed. I tripped twice today. I told her to throw them away, but she didn't. She said they were comfortable and she wasn't superstitious." Maybe I should have insisted. Maybe I should have known that the same shoes she loved would be the ones to tell me she was gone. By the third day, the police had closed the missing person file. Adults have the right to disappear, they said. No sign of foul play. They ignored the blood, said it could have been hers from a cut, or even animal blood. They didn't test it. They didn't care. The whole town started whispering. "Did you hear Clara ran off with some man?" Such a shame. Her poor husband. Her mother was always strange. Maybe she got it from her. The story spread faster than truth ever could. Preston's family made sure of that. They smiled through every interview, through every church visit, telling people they forgave Clara for her mistake. And I fooled that I was stayed quiet, because I thought if I stayed calm, I'd think clearer. But the silence was like poison. Every night I heard her car door slam again. Every night I saw those shoes. And every morning when I stepped onto that porch, I felt the air still holding her last breath. I started writing everything down, the times, the sounds, the faces, the looks. A diary of details no one cared about. I wrote how Preston's hand trembled slightly when he said her name, how Diane avoided eye contact when I asked about the bruise on Preston's neck, how the dog next door barked only that one night. Every note felt like a piece of her, something to hold on to when the rest of the world wanted me to forget. The first real crack appeared a week later. I went to their house, pretending to drop off Clara's mail. Their maid, an old woman who'd worked for Diane for years, met me at the door. Her eyes were wet. "You should stop asking questions, Mrs. Elaine," she whispered. "The walls in this house don't like noise." Then she shut the door. That was the moment I knew my daughter hadn't left. She'd been erased. That night I sat on the porch again. The wind carried the smell of rain and something else, fertilizer maybe. It came from their property across the field. The scent was too sharp, too recent. And then, as if the night itself wanted to confess, the porch light flickered and died, and I saw just for a second a shadow moving near the fence line. I wasn't afraid. I just whispered, "Clara, if you're here, show me." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Now I'm asking you, the ones listening to my story, what would you do if your child disappeared and the world laughed in your face? Would you move on like they told me to? Or would you keep digging even if the ground itself tried to bury the truth? If you believe a mother's instinct never lies, write one in the comments. But if you think I should have let her go just like they wanted me to, then maybe you should like this video. Either way, stay with me, because what I found next didn't just prove my daughter was gone. It proved she never left at all. 3 days after finding the shoes, the house still smelled of cold leather and blood. I hadn't moved them since that night. They sat on the kitchen table like witnesses refusing to speak. I didn't dare clean the stains, not even when the flies started to circle. The police had said there was no crime, so they didn't take them for testing. They said it was probably old blood, like that made it any less horrifying. But I knew what I saw. I took out a magnifying glass from my drawer, the kind I used at the store to check tiny product labels, and I studied every inch. On the left shoe near the sole, there was a thin, almost invisible scratch filled with something dark brown. Blood turns brown when it dries. I rubbed it gently with a cotton swab, and the color came off sticky and coppery. I brought it close to my nose. The metallic scent made my stomach turn. Clara had small feet, size 6, and I'd bought those shoes for her birthday the year before. White canvas, simple, nothing fancy. She'd said, "They're perfect, Mom," like something I can run away in if life ever gets too much. It was a joke then, a cruel prophecy now. That afternoon, I went to the police station. I carried the shoes in a grocery bag like they were sacred relics. The officer on duty was the same one who had taken the original report, a young man with tired eyes and a rehearsed sympathy. "Mrs. Webb," he said with a sigh, "I told you already there's no evidence of a crime. If your daughter left on her own, there's not much we can do." I placed the shoes on the counter and pointed at the stain. "Does this look voluntary to you?" He leaned closer, squinting, but his voice didn't change. "Could be anything. Paint, maybe." "Smell it," I snapped. "Paint doesn't smell like iron." He stepped back, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, ma'am, we don't have the budget to test every piece of fabric that comes through. Unless you've got something more concrete." I stared at him until the silence became unbearable. Then I picked up the shoes, placed them back in the bag, and said quietly, "I'll find the evidence myself." That night, I decided to check my front porch camera, a small device I'd installed last year, after someone stole a package. I plugged the memory card into my laptop, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, I saw nothing at all. The folder was empty. Every recording from that night was gone. The rest of the week was intact, every clip before and after. But the one night Clara vanished erased. Someone had deleted it manually. I called the company's helpline, pretending to be a confused customer. The technician walked me through a log check. Well, he said the footage wasn't overwritten automatically. Someone accessed it from your own Wi-Fi network around 3:12 a.m. 3:12 a.m., the exact time I heard the car engine. I asked him if he could see what device was used. He hesitated. "It's showing an external access through a mobile connection. Same network ID as your neighbor's account." My neighbor. "Yes, registered under Preston and Clara Webb." I thanked him and hung up before he could say more. My hands were shaking. It was him. He'd logged in from their house to delete the recording. That night, I drove past their property. Their house was dark except for the barn lights glowing in the distance. The smell of fertilizer, again sharp chemical, masking something worse. The dog barked when my car slowed down. I turned off the headlights and sat there for a minute staring at the windows, half expecting to see Clara's shadow behind the curtains. But there was nothing. The next morning, I went to their house with a plate of cookies. Diane opened the door, smiling too sweetly. Elaine. What a surprise. I smiled back the same fake warmth. Just thought I'd stop by. I had extra cookies and, well, I thought maybe you've heard from Clara. Her smile didn't flicker, but her eyes did. Oh dear, no. Not since she... Since she what, I asked, forcing my tone to stay calm. Since she left, she said, tilting her head with mock pity. You have to let her go, Elaine. You're torturing yourself. Preston appeared behind her shirt, half-buttoned, looking irritated. What's this about? I looked at him and said I just wanted to bring you something sweet. I handed him the plate and added, you deleted my security footage at 3:12 in the morning. He froze, the color draining from his face for just a second. Then he laughed. I don't know what you're talking about. I have logs, I said. You used your phone. You were here when she disappeared, weren't you? Diane stepped between us, still smiling, but with steel in her eyes. Elaine, please. We understand grief can make people imagine things. Why don't you go home and rest? I looked at her perfect manicure, at the diamond ring flashing in the light. You can polish a lie, Diane, but it still stinks. Her face hardened. She shut the door so quietly it was worse than a slam. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to breathe. The air felt too heavy. I looked again at the shoes. The blood, the deletion, the lies, they were all connected. But there was still something missing, a piece I couldn't see yet. Then I remembered something. The day before Clara vanished, she had come to the store to drop off my lunch. We'd argued about Preston. She said he was changing, growing distant, angry. I told her to come home for a few days to clear her head. She'd smiled sadly and said, I can't, Mom. You wouldn't understand. Some things you just have to survive quietly. Survive quietly. That phrase kept repeating in my head like an echo from the grave. I took her phone charger from her room and plugged it into my wall socket, half expecting nothing. But when I opened my old landline inbox, I saw a new voicemail alert. Clara's phone had been registered under my family plan, so her voicemail still forwarded to me. I pressed play. Mom, her voice whispered, barely audible, the sound of rain in the background. If anything happens, don't believe them. Don't let them bury me in lies. The line went dead. The timestamp was the night she disappeared. I dropped the phone. My legs went weak. For a long time, I just stood there, the sound replaying in my head, her voice shaking but determined. That was the moment the fear turned into purpose. They thought I'd sit quietly, cry myself to sleep, believe their story, but they'd forgotten something important. I've spent my entire life behind a counter watching people. I know when someone's lying, when a story doesn't fit, when a price tag's been swapped. They swapped my daughter's truth for their lie, and now I was going to switch it back. So I wrote everything again carefully this time. The shoes, the deleted footage, the blood, the voicemail, the smell of fertilizer. I sealed the pages in an envelope and mailed one copy to my lawyer, one to my sister, and one to myself. Because if they ever came for me next, someone had to know where to look. Now tell me, if you were me, would you stop there? Would you believe the lies just to sleep better at night? Or would you start digging for the truth, even if it meant getting dirt under your nails? If you think I should keep going, write one in the comments. If you think I'm going too far, like this video. But remember, truth doesn't sleep, and neither do I. By the end of that week, I learned what it meant to be erased while still breathing. They didn't just take Clara. They took her story, twisted it, dressed it up, and paraded it through town until even people I'd known for decades started avoiding my eyes. The first rumor came from the church ladies, always the first to smell blood. Elaine's daughter ran off with a married man, one whispered behind the hymn book. Another gasped, poor Preston. He must be devastated. I sat 3 pews away, pretending not to hear, my hands folded so tightly in prayer my knuckles turned white. But the worst part wasn't the gossip. It was the precision of it. Someone was feeding the lies, crafting them piece by piece. The newspaper printed a small article. Local woman missing husband pleads for return. The photo they used was one I hated, a candid, of Clara from her wedding day. Smiling nervously beside Preston, his hand gripping her shoulder like ownership. The article quoted him saying she'd been distant lately, confused. I just want her to come home, even if it's not to me. Confused. That single word was a knife. It made her sound unstable, fragile, unreliable. It made his lies sound like compassion. When I called the reporter, she told me the information came directly from Preston's family. They said she'd been struggling emotionally, she said, as if she were reading a press release. Maybe suffering from some kind of breakdown. I asked if anyone had mentioned the voicemail. The blood, the deleted footage. She hesitated, then said softly, "No, ma'am. That's not the story they gave us." That night, I tore the newspaper into pieces and burned it in the sink. The ink bled and curled into smoke. I watched it vanish, thinking this is how they do it. They burn the truth one page at a time. The next morning, I went to the grocery store. It was the only place in town where people couldn't avoid me forever. Whispers followed me down every aisle. At the checkout, the cashier, a girl barely 20, said quietly, "Mrs. Webb, I'm sorry about your daughter." I forced a smile. "Thank you." She hesitated, then leaned in. "My cousin works at the car wash. He said Mr. Webb came in the morning after she went missing. His car had, stains on the bumper." "What kind of stains?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. The girl looked around nervously. He didn't say, but he told me it looked like dried blood. It took everything in me not to collapse right there beside the candy rack. I left the groceries and drove straight to the car wash. The place smelled like soap and diesel. A young man in overalls came out wiping his hands on a rag. "You the lady from Maple Street?" he asked. I nodded. "You saw my son-in-law's car?" He looked uneasy. "Ma'am, I shouldn't." "I'm not asking you to lie," I said. "Just tell me what you saw." He sighed, glancing at the empty lot. "Black SUV, right? Came in early, like 6 a.m. He paid cash, told me not to log the ticket. Said it was a personal matter." There was mud all along the tires and something dark on the back bumper. I asked if he hit a deer. He said, "Yeah, but..." The boy's voice dropped. It didn't look like animal blood. It looked like handprints. Handprints. The word pulsed through me like electricity. "Did you tell anyone?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. His family's got connections. I need this job." I gave him my card. "If anyone asks, you didn't talk to me. But if you remember anything else, call this number, anytime." He nodded, eyes wide. I could tell he was scared, but so was I. That night, I tried to eat, but couldn't. The food turned to dust in my mouth. I stared at the empty chair across from me. That was where Clara used to sit, complaining about her students or laughing at her own jokes. I remembered her voice, her warmth, her habit of biting the inside of her cheek when she lied about being okay. I whispered, "They think you ran away, baby. They think they can make me forget you." Then I looked at the window and saw my own reflection, older, thinner eyes, hollow. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who used to bake pies for the neighbors. This one had become someone colder, harder, someone capable of fighting the kind of war no one else wanted to see. The following morning, Diane came to my store. She wore sunglasses and a white coat even though it was humid. Her perfume hit first heavy and artificial, drowning the smell of coffee and cardboard. "Elaine," she said sweetly, "we need to talk." I said nothing, just leaned on the counter. She smiled, setting a small envelope on the table. "Preston and I think it would be best if you took some time away. The attention, the rumors, it's not healthy. We're all grieving, but you're making it worse for everyone." I opened the envelope. Inside was a check, $10,000. I laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You think you can buy me off?" "Not buy you," she said softly. "Help you. People say things. The more you dig, the more they'll talk. I'd hate for you to ruin your daughter's memory chasing ghosts." I looked her dead in the eye. "You buried her once already. I won't let you bury her again." The mask slipped. Her voice hardened. "Be careful, Elaine. Grief makes people do dangerous things." "So does guilt," I said. She took a slow breath, slid her sunglasses back on, and walked out. I waited until the door closed before I tore the check into pieces. The scraps floated down like snow. That night, I drove to the field behind their house again. This time, I parked farther away, lights off, engine quiet. The moon was low, the sky heavy with clouds. I walked through the tall grass until I reached their fence. Beyond it, I saw a mound of fresh dirt near the garden. The smell of fertilizer was stronger now, thick and chemical. I took a photo with my phone zoomed in. In the picture, something glinted faintly in the soil, a small silver curve like jewelry. I wanted to climb over the fence, but I stopped. Not yet. I needed to be smart. If I got caught trespassing, they'd use it to destroy me completely. I backed away, my heart pounding. When I got home, I printed the photo and taped it next to my notes. A pattern was forming like a puzzle where every piece was soaked in pain. The shoes, the blood, the deleted footage, the car washed the money, the garden. It all pointed to the same truth. They didn't lose. Clara, they silenced her. But I still didn't have proof strong enough to open the case again. I needed one more piece, something undeniable. I spent the next few days pretending to go along with the story. I smiled when people asked how I was. I even went to Sunday service, sitting 2 rows behind Diane and Preston. When they stood to sing, I noticed something on his wrist. A red scratch, healed now thin but deep. I thought about the handprints on his car. After the service, he turned and smiled at me like nothing had happened. "Good to see you back in church, Mom," he said. Mom, that word tasted like poison. I smiled back. "You always said you believed in forgiveness, Preston. I hope you still do." He chuckled. "Of course." "Good," I said, stepping closer, "because soon you're gonna need it." He blinked confused, but before he could speak, I walked away. At home, I opened my journal and wrote everything again, times, places, faces, details. This time, I underlined one sentence 3 times. Lies spread faster than truth, but they burned twice as bright when caught on fire. I looked out at the horizon. Thunder was building low and distant. The storm was coming. Now tell me, if someone you love disappeared and the world called her a liar, would you accept it? Would you sit quietly while they rewrote her story? Or would you set their lies on fire? If you believe truth deserves a voice, comment 1. If you think silence keeps the peace, then like this video. But stay, because what came next proved that even the perfect lie can't survive the first drop of rain. By the time the second week passed, I realized the most dangerous thing about the truth isn't how hard it is to find. It's how alone it makes you once you start digging. Every day, someone else turned away. People who used to greet me at the store now lowered their eyes or crossed the street. One woman I'd known for 30 years looked right through me like I'd become invisible. I heard the whispers behind my back, or Elaine, she's lost it. She's obsessed. She's accusing her own family. Even my sister called one night from another state, her voice full of pity, disguised as concern. "Maybe you should stop, Elle," she said gently. "Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there." I wanted to scream at her. You didn't hear the voicemail, you didn't smell the blood, you didn't watch the video vanish, but instead I just said you didn't see her shoes. Then I hung up. The silence that followed was thick, almost physical. I began to talk to Clara out loud just to fill it. I'd sit on the porch staring at the fields, whispering things like, "Do you remember that blue dress you hated?" Or "I found your lipstick in the car, baby. It still smells like you." Sometimes I thought I could hear her answer in the wind, soft and distant, like breath over glass. But the living were louder than the dead. The next morning, someone had spray painted across the wall of my store, "Crazy woman, let her go." The words dripped red, mocking me like a wound that refused to close. I stood there in the early light, watching the paint glisten. For a moment, I almost laughed. They wanted me to let her go. That was the one thing I could never do. Later that day, the police came again, 2 officers this time, young and polite, in that way that's worse than cruelty. Mrs. Webb 1 said, "We've had complaints. People say you've been harassing your son-in-law's family." "Harassing," I repeated. "I've been asking for the truth." The other officer gave a small, tight smile. "We understand you're grieving, but trespassing near their property at night isn't going to help your case." My throat went dry. "Did they tell you I was trespassing?" "They have security footage," he said. "You were near their fence last Tuesday." I almost laughed. "Good. That means their cameras actually work unlike mine." They exchanged a glance. "We're just asking you to stop. If you keep showing up there, we'll have to file a report." I signed the paper they handed me without reading it. I didn't care. The law wasn't going to save my daughter. It had already buried her once. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched since my husband died. I sat by the window staring at the porch where her shoes had once been. I thought about burning everything, my notes, the photos, the evidence. Maybe if I destroyed it, the pain would go with it. But then I looked at the wall where her picture hung. She was smiling, head tilted slightly, eyes full of light. The same light I saw when she took her first steps. I couldn't burn that. The storm broke around midnight. The rain came in sheets, hammering the roof. I went outside anyway, barefoot, letting the water soak through my dress. I walked to the edge of the porch and whispered, "If you're still here, give me something. Anything." The thunder cracked like an answer, and for a moment I thought I saw a flash near the old oak tree. Something metallic glinting under the lightning. The next morning, when the storm passed, I went out to check. The ground was soft and muddy, my feet sinking with each step. Near the tree, half buried in dirt, something caught the light again. I knelt and dug it out with my hands. It was a small silver earring shaped like a crescent moon, the pair to one Clara always wore. I held it in my palm, shaking. The clasp was broken and the metal was bent slightly inward like it had been pulled hard during a struggle. I washed it off under the hose and the mud turned red as it swirled away. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just stood there, water running down my arms, the earring glinting in my hand like proof of everything I'd been screaming into the void. That night, I took it to the police again. The same officer from before met me at the desk. "Mrs. Webb," he sighed. "What is it this time?" I placed the earring in a plastic bag. "It's hers. I found it buried near the field behind their property." He looked at it without touching it. "Do you have proof it was buried there?" "Photos, witnesses." I wanted to hit him. "Do I need a witness for my own daughter's blood?" He leaned back, tired. "We'll log it, but without context, it's not much. People lose things all the time." "Not buried under mud," I said quietly. "Not with the clasp broken." He didn't answer. He filled out a form, stapled the bag shut, and placed it in a box of miscellaneous items. I could see the word unverified stamped on the label. I left before I said something that would get me arrested. When I got home, there was an envelope on my doorstep, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, printed from a low-quality camera. It showed me standing by the fence near the Webb's property. The caption written in red marker, "Keep digging and you'll join her." I felt my pulse in my throat. My first instinct was fear, but it passed quickly, replaced by something sharper, anger, pure and clean. They wanted to scare me into silence. They didn't understand yet I'd already lived through the worst thing imaginable. There was nothing left they could take from me. I taped the photo to my wall next to everything else. It fit perfectly among the other pieces, the shoes, the blood, the deleted footage, the car wash, and now the earring. A story in fragments written by cowards who thought they could outlast a mother's will. That night, I called the car wash boy again. His voice trembled when he answered. "Mrs. Webb, please don't call me." They came by. "Who?" "Some men. Said that they were from the Webb family's business. They asked if I'd talked to anyone about that car. I told them no, but I think they knew I was lying." My chest tightened. "Did they threaten you?" He hesitated. "They didn't have to." I closed my eyes. "You did the right thing, son. Stay quiet for now. I'll handle the rest." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The wind outside was restless, scraping the windows. I thought of the earring again, of Clara's hand reaching up to touch her ear whenever she was nervous. That tiny motion I'd seen 1,000 times. I could see it so clearly that for a moment, I forgot she was gone. Then I remembered something else. The day before she disappeared, she'd been wearing those earrings when she came to say goodbye. She'd hugged me at the door quick and tight, and I'd felt one of the crescents brush against my cheek. She said, "I'll call you tomorrow," but she never did. Now, one of those earrings was buried in the mud behind her husband's house. At dawn, I packed a small bag. Inside, I put the earring copies of all my notes and a flash drive with the recovered network log from the camera company. I wrote a letter, sealed it, and placed it inside the bag. If anything happened to me, it would go to the sheriff's office and 2 journalists I knew from years ago. When I stepped outside, the sun was rising. The air was heavy with that same scent fertilizer earth, something metallic underneath. I looked toward their property and whispered, "I'm coming for you." That evening, the lights in their house went out at exactly 9. I sat on my porch counting the seconds until the world fell silent. I wasn't going to run anymore. I wasn't going to beg anyone to believe me. I'd let the ground speak for itself. So tell me if you found proof that your child's last breath was buried under someone else's garden. Would you wait for permission to dig, or would you tear the earth open with your bare hands if that's what it took to find the truth? If you dig, write one. If you'd rather look away like the rest of them than like this video, but remember this. Sometimes the only way to find peace is to disturb the ground everyone else pretends is holy. The night I decided to cross their fence, I didn't feel brave. I just felt empty. There's a moment when grief stops hurting and becomes something else, something quiet, sharp, and cold. That's what I felt as I put on Clara's old jacket, tucked my flashlight into my pocket, and stepped out into the dark. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and fertilizer. The moon hung low, a dull white coin over the fields. I moved slowly, careful not to make a sound, my shoes sinking into the mud. Their property sat across the pasture like a wound stitched shut with expensive fences and fake lights. Diane's roses lined the walkway even at this hour, glowing faintly under the porch lamps. Perfect, too perfect, like everything else about that family. But behind the house, past the garden, was the barn, and behind that, the patch of dirt I'd seen in my photo. The place where the ground looked disturbed. I reached the fence and hesitated, my hand gripping the cold wire. My heart beat hard against my ribs, but not from fear, from certainty. I climbed over, landing softly on the other side. The grass was damp, brushing against my legs. I turned off the flashlight and waited for my eyes to adjust. Every sound was a threat. The hum of crickets, the creak of the barn door shifting in the wind. I moved toward the mound. The earth there was darker, uneven. I knelt, pressing my fingers into it. Still soft, recently turned. I began to dig with my bare hands, scraping away the wet soil. My nails filled with dirt. My breath came fast. For a long time there was nothing, just the sound of my heartbeat and the soft pull of earth. Then my fingers brushed against something hard. Metal. I froze, then dug faster until I saw it, the handle of a shovel buried halfway. I pulled it out. The blade was caked with mud and something darker, something that didn't wash off easily. I shone the flashlight on it just for a second and saw what I already knew. Blood. Before I could think, a voice cut through the darkness. You shouldn't be here. I spun around the beam, catching him in the chest, Preston. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a shadow behind his calm face. His voice was low, almost gentle. You're trespassing, Elaine. My throat tightened. What did you do to her? He didn't move. You need to stop. I stepped closer, gripping the shovel. Tell me where she is. He sighed as if I were a child, refusing to understand a simple truth. You're making a fool of yourself. People are starting to talk. Let them talk, I said. I'll keep digging until I find her. Something flickered in his eyes, then fear or maybe rage. He took a step closer. You don't want to find what's in that ground. I lifted the flashlight higher. You're right, I want to find who put it there. He smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was pity. You always did think you were smarter than everyone else. You should have left her alone, Elaine. She was happy before you filled her head with doubts. Happy. The word came out like acid. She called me crying. She said you scared her. He laughed softly. She was dramatic, like you. That's when I saw it, a smear of dirt on his sleeve, fresh wet. He followed my gaze and quickly crossed his arms. Go home, he said quietly. This isn't your fight anymore. She was my daughter, I whispered. It's only my fight. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain started again, soft at first, then heavier each drop like a heartbeat against the metal of the shovel. Then, from the direction of the house, a light flicked on. Diane's voice called out from the porch, sharp and tired. Preston, what's going on out there? He didn't turn around. His voice stayed calm. Nothing, Mom, just checking the noise. I realized then how easily he could end this. One call, one accusation, and I'd be the crazy woman caught sneaking onto their land at night. No one would believe me. I lowered the flashlight slowly, pretending to back away. You're right, I said. Maybe I did go too far. He nodded, slightly relieved, and took a step back. That's when I ran. I didn't look behind me until I was across the fence, my lungs burning. The rain turned the field into a mirror reflecting the faint glow of their house. I dropped the shovel near my porch and fell to my knees, mud splattering across my hands. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I'd been so close enough to smell the truth. Inside, I locked every door and window. My reflection in the glass looked wild, unrecognizable. I poured a glass of water, but my hands shook too much to drink it. I wanted to scream to call someone, but there was no one left to call. So I sat down at the table and started writing again. Every word had to survive me in case I didn't. He caught me at the site. The soil is soft. There's blood on a shovel. He knows I know. I sealed the paper in another envelope and hid it under the floorboard beneath the stove. Then I sat in the dark until morning, listening for footsteps that never came. At dawn, I went back outside. The shovel was gone. That single fact hit harder than any threat. Someone had come during the night and taken it. I walked out to the field again, stopping at the fence. The mound I dug was smoothed over, perfect again, like nothing had ever been disturbed. Later that day, 2 police officers showed up. Not the same young ones, this time older men serious. One handed me a folded piece of paper. "You've been issued a restraining order, Mrs. Webb. You're not to go near the Webb property again." I unfolded it. Preston's signature sat neatly at the bottom. My voice came out hollow. "He's faster than I thought." The older officer frowned. "We're trying to keep things civil. Please don't make this harder on yourself." I laughed bitterly. "Harder? My daughter's gone. How much harder do you think it can get?" He looked away. "I'm sorry for your loss." The phrase was so automatic it almost sounded rehearsed. I wanted to tell him she wasn't lost, she'd been hidden, but I could already see it in his eyes. He didn't believe me either. After they left, I sat in the kitchen staring at the empty table. The house was too quiet. The silence pressed against my chest until I couldn't breathe. That's when the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. At first there was nothing, just static. Then a voice, low and rough. "You should have stayed on your side of the fence. The line went dead." I dropped the phone. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo through the house. I ran to the window. Across the field, the Webb house stood still and perfect, no movement, no light. But I knew he was watching. That was the breaking point, not the fear, the certainty, the realization that no one was coming to save me. The law, the town, the family they'd all chosen, comfort over truth. If I wanted justice for Clara, I'd have to take it myself. That night, I packed a new envelope. Inside, I placed copies of my notes, the voicemail recording the photos of the dirt mound, and a letter addressed to a friend of Clara's at the college, someone she trusted. On the envelope, I wrote, "If something happens to me, tell my daughter's story." Then I mailed it. For the first time in weeks, I slept. Not peacefully, but with purpose. When I woke, the sun was bright, the sky clear. I walked out to the porch and looked toward their land. Somewhere under that perfect lawn lay everything they'd tried to hide, and they thought they'd scared me off. They didn't understand that the moment I crossed that fence, I stopped being afraid. You can threaten a woman who has something to lose, but once she's lost it, there's nothing left you can take. So tell me, if someone warned you to stop digging when you were one breath away from the truth, would you stop? Would you choose safety over justice? If you'd keep going, write one. If you'd walk away like they did, then like this video. But remember, sometimes the only way to find peace is to stop praying for angels and become your own. The morning after the restraining order, I sat on the porch steps watching the mail truck disappear down the road. I felt strangely calm, the way you do after a funeral, like the worst has already happened, and everything that follows is just a shadow. I had mailed the envelope. My proof, my words, my confession. If something happened to me now, at least the truth had somewhere to go. But still, I wasn't done. I made coffee black and bitter and sat at the table with the old photo album Clara loved to flip through as a child. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe to remind myself who I was fighting for. On the third page was a picture of her holding a butterfly net, her hair tangled by the wind eyes shining. I touched her face with the tip of my finger and whispered, "I'll finish what you started, baby, even if it kills me." The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was calm, steady. "Mrs. Webb, my name's Frank Bennett. I used to work homicide in the next county. I got your letter." I froze. My letter. I do some consulting now. A friend at the college forwarded it to me. I read what you wrote. "You're not crazy, ma'am. I've seen cases like this before." Something inside me cracked the first hint of relief I'd felt in weeks. "You believe me." "I believe that men like your son-in-law don't usually stop at lying," he said. "And I believe you're in danger if he thinks you won't quit." I hesitated. "Why help me?" "Because once I didn't help someone who needed it. I've been trying to balance the scales ever since." He offered to meet the next day at a diner on the edge of town. When I walked in, he was already there. A tall man in his 60s, rough hands, eyes like gravel after rain. He looked like someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. "Mrs. Webb," he said, standing up. "You look exactly how I expected too smart to believe convenient lies." We talked for hours. I told him everything, the shoes, the blood, the deleted footage, the earring, the threats. He listened, taking notes in a small leather pad. When I finished, he said quietly, "He's covering something big. Men like him always underestimate two things: paperwork and women who don't scare easily." He pulled out a small drive. "I have friends who still work tech forensics. If you can get me that network log from your camera, we can prove tampering." "I already have it," I said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "The company sent me a copy." He smiled. "Then we have a start." We met every few days after that, always in public, always during daylight. He taught me how to collect evidence properly, how to document timestamps, how to back up files in cloud storage, how to keep a paper trail even if someone hacked my devices. He even gave me a burner phone. "If anything happens, call this first," he said, "not the police." At first it felt strange having someone on my side again, but soon it became the only thing that kept me steady. We started digging quietly into Preston's past. Frank had contacts who could pull financial records. Within a week, he found something that made my blood run cold. "There's a life insurance policy," he said. "Your daughter took it out 6 months ago, $500,000 payable to Preston Webb." I stared at the paper in disbelief. She didn't tell me about this. She probably didn't know the full story. "Look here, the signature on the renewal form. See that curve on there that's forged? She didn't sign this one." My stomach turned, so he stood to gain a lot from her death, Frank finished. "And it gets worse. The claim's already been filed." He told the insurance company she drowned after running away. I gripped the edge of the table until my nails dug into the wood. "He's cashing in on her." Frank's voice stayed calm, but his jaw tightened. "Not yet. I've contacted someone in the insurance fraud division. They're going to freeze the claim while we gather more evidence." For the first time, I felt a flicker of power. I wasn't just screaming into the void anymore, I was being heard. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. Every hour I expected it to ring again with some new threat. Instead, I called Frank. "You said you've seen cases like this before," I said softly. "How do they end?" He was quiet for a moment. "The guilty get sloppy, and the living get brave." I looked out the window toward the Webb house, their porch lights glowing faintly in the distance. Then it's time I stopped being quiet. The next day I went to the bank where Clara's account had been held. The teller recognized me and hesitated, but I insisted on speaking with the manager. "I need to check something about my daughter's account," I said. "I'm her next of kin." The manager glanced at the computer, frowning. "It says here the account was closed 3 weeks ago." "Closed by who?" He hesitated. "Her husband, power of attorney." I felt my heart sink. He had that. The manager nodded. "It's a notarized document, dated 2 days before her disappearance." I asked to see it. He handed me a copy. The signature at the bottom was shaky, uncertain, but I'd know my daughter's handwriting anywhere. This wasn't hers. The loops were wrong, the spacing too wide. I thanked him and left my hands trembling. Outside, I texted Frank. He forged her signature again. Power of attorney 2 days before. He replied almost instantly, "Good. Now we have motive, timeline, and method. We just need proof of the act." Proof of the act. The words rang in my head all night. What could be stronger than the truth buried in their garden? Frank suggested we contact a judge to get a warrant for the property, but without hard evidence, it would take weeks they could use to destroy everything. "We'll get one shot," he said. "We need something undeniable." The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, I saw a black SUV parked at the end of my driveway. Preston's car. My pulse hammered. He didn't get out, just sat there engine idling, watching. I called Frank. "He's here." "Don't confront him," Frank said. "Stay inside." Let him think you're scared." But I wasn't scared anymore. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, the kind that bites your lungs. I walked down the steps slowly until I could see his face through the windshield. He was smiling, that same smug, confident smile. I picked up my phone, pretending to take a photo. His smile faltered. He rolled down the window. "You can't stop what's already done," he said. I lowered my voice. "Neither can you." He stared at me for a long second, then drove away. The tires kicked up dust that hung in the air long after he was gone. That evening, Frank called again. "We got the insurance company's cooperation. They've agreed to record your next conversation with Preston if he calls or visits again. That'll give us evidence of his intent." "Intent to what?" I asked. "To silence you," Frank said flatly, "and to cover his tracks." I thought about that as I stood by the window watching the last light fade from the sky. I wasn't the same woman who'd cried over her daughter's shoes. I was something else now, something harder, sharper, forged in silence and loss. I whispered to Clara's photo, "You can rest soon, I promise." Now tell me, if someone gave you the power to expose the person who destroyed your family, would you use it? Even if it meant walking into danger alone, if you'd take that risk, comment 1. If you'd turn away like everyone else did, then like this video. But stay, because the night I trapped him was the night I learned that justice isn't always about the law. Sometimes it's about who can stay standing when the truth finally screams. It happened 2 nights later. I knew it would, the way you know a storm's coming long before the clouds turn black. The air goes still, the world holds its breath, and everything inside you starts to hum like a wire about to snap. Frank had told me not to be alone, but he couldn't stay every night. He left town that afternoon to meet an investigator about the insurance fraud case, promising to call in the morning. Before he left, he handed me a small recorder, no bigger than a lighter. "Keep this on you," he said. "If he comes, let him talk. Fear makes guilty men loud." I kept it in my pocket the whole evening, the way some people hold a rosary. I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the lights. The house was silent except for the slow ticking of the clock above the stove. 9:40, 10, 10:15, and then I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the window, I saw headlights sweep across the yard and stop. The same black SUV. He didn't bother parking far this time. He wanted me to know he was here. I stood still, my pulse slow and heavy, and waited for the knock. It came sharp and deliberate, 3 times. I opened the door. Preston stood on the porch rain, glistening on his jacket. That smile, cold, condescending, stretched across his face. "Evening, Mom," he said softly. "You look tired." "I'm fine," I replied, my voice steady. "You shouldn't be here." He took a step forward, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Neither should you out there in my yard digging holes like a lunatic." I was looking for the truth. He laughed, low and bitter. "The truth you wouldn't recognize it if it hit you in the face. You're chasing ghosts." "Then why are you here?" I asked quietly. That wiped the smile off his face. He shoved his hands into his pockets and glanced around the room. "Because you don't know when to quit. You keep dragging my name through the mud, calling reporters, talking to old cops. It's pathetic." "Pathetic?" I took a step closer. "What's pathetic is pretending to mourn someone you murdered." His eyes flashed just for a second, then narrowed. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think your little stories are going to make anyone believe you." I could hear the faint hum of the recorder in my pocket, capturing every word. I said softly, "I don't need them to believe me. I just need you to keep talking." He blinked, thrown off balance. "What did you say?" I smiled faintly. "You've been doing it all along, talking. Covering lies with more lies. I can see it on you, Preston. Every time you open your mouth, you give a piece of it away." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "You're out of your mind." "Clara ran away. She left because she couldn't stand your paranoia." "Then why did she leave her shoes on my porch?" I snapped. "Why did you delete my camera footage? Why did your car have her blood on it?" He froze. Just for a second, that was all it took. You can't prove that he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder. "Maybe not by myself, but you just did." His face changed panic, then fury. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. "Give it to me." "Let go." He squeezed harder. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I hissed. "You killed her." His eyes went wild. She was going to leave me. She was going to ruin everything. She wouldn't shut up. She wouldn't stop crying. The words tumbled out before he realized what he was saying. The moment hung in the air like a bullet before impact. His grip loosened, his face pale. "Oh," I whispered, "you finally said it." He stepped back, breathing hard. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but you'll regret it longer." He turned toward the door, but I moved first, flipping the deadbolt, leaving already. "What's the rush? Don't you want to hear what I did?" He glared at me. "You're bluffing." I nodded toward the corner of the room where my old landline sat, glowing red. "The line's been open since you knocked. Everything you just said went straight to Frank Bennett's recorder across town." His face went white. "You're lying." I smiled. "That's your area of expertise, not mine." For a moment, I thought he might attack me. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. Then slowly he straightened, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "You don't know what you've done." "Yes," I said softly. "I do. I just made you confess." He stared at me for a long, unbearable moment, then turned and yanked the door open. Rain poured in, splattering the floor. He stepped outside without another word, slamming the door behind him so hard the frame shook. I stood there staring at the empty doorway, my breath coming in short bursts. My hand trembled as I stopped the recording and played it back. His voice, rough and shaking. She was going to ruin everything. She wouldn't stop crying. It was enough. Enough to end his lies, to end the story. I called Frank immediately. He picked up on the first ring. "You got him." "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He came here. He confessed." Frank exhaled slowly. "Don't move. Lock your doors. I'll call the sheriff myself." I hung up, turned the lock, and leaned against the door. For the first time in months, the air in the house felt different. Lighter, cleaner, alive. I went to the window and watched his SUV tear down the road, disappearing into the dark. I whispered to the night, "You shouldn't have come here, Preston. You brought the truth with you. Now tell me, if the person who destroyed your life came to your door, would you open it? Would you face them knowing you might not survive, just to hear them say what you already knew? If you do it, comment 1. If you'd hide behind the curtain like the others did, then like this video. But stay. Because the world doesn't change when the truth is whispered. It changes when someone finally screams it." By dawn, the world no longer belonged to lies. The storm that had haunted my nights was finally breaking, not with thunder this time, but with sirens. I heard them long before I saw the lights, flashes of red and blue slicing through the fog outside my window. I stood on the porch, still wearing Clara's old jacket, watching as 3 police cruisers and 1 unmarked car rolled up the hill toward the Webb estate. Frank arrived 10 minutes later. He got out of his truck with that same calm look that men like him wear before a storm turns violent. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed me a thermos of coffee. "You recorded everything he asked." I nodded. He confessed. Every word. He gave a small, grim smile. "Then it's over." But he was wrong. It wasn't over, not yet. We drove up the dirt road together, the morning light cutting through the mist. By the time we reached the Webb property, the entire place was alive with motion. Officers in dark jackets were everywhere, some near the barn, others digging around the garden. Diane stood on the porch, pale and trembling, wrapped in a silk robe that looked wrong in the daylight. Preston was handcuffed by the patrol car. His hair wet his face, blank with disbelief. He looked smaller than I remembered, like a man who'd finally met the truth and realized it couldn't be bribed. When he saw me step out of the truck, his eyes widened. "You think this is justice?" he shouted. "You don't know what you've done." I didn't answer. I just stood there watching as the officers led him toward the car. The press had already started to gather at the edge of the property, their cameras flashing like lightning. The same people who once printed his smiling photo under "Local husband pleads for wife's return" were now shouting questions at him through the fence. The sheriff walked over to us, a man I hadn't met before, gray hair, sharp eyes. "Mrs. Webb," he said, nodding, "we'll need a formal statement, but I want you to know your recording gave us probable cause to reopen the case." "Did you find her?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled. He hesitated for a moment. "We're still working the site, ma'am, but we found disturbed soil near the north fence and traces of blood on a shovel buried nearby." The words hit me like a weight I'd been holding finally set down. I closed my eyes and whispered, "She's home." Frank placed a hand on my shoulder. "She'll get her name back, Elaine. You both will." Hours passed in a blur of movement and noise. I gave my statement to the detectives, played the recording again, watched them photograph the evidence. At some point, Diane broke down sobbing as two officers guided her away. I didn't know she kept saying. I didn't know, but she had known. Maybe not the details, but enough to choose silence. And silence was its own kind of crime. By afternoon, the story was everywhere. Reporters stood in the rain, broadcasting live updates, husband arrested and wife's disappearance evidence found on family property. Social media burned with Clara's name. Hashtags, photos, outrage. People who once whispered about her running away now spoke about justice. But I didn't care about any of that. All I wanted was to stand by the fence one last time, to look at the ground where the truth had slept so long. Frank joined me. They'll take him in for questioning. Once the DNA comes back, it'll be open and shut. I nodded. He'll lie again. Maybe, Frank said, but the difference now is that no one will listen. 2 weeks later, the trial began. It wasn't as loud as the headlines made it sound. Real justice never is. The courtroom was small, the air heavy with perfume and dust. Preston sat at the defense table, pale and still, his hands clasped tightly. He didn't look at me. The prosecutor played the recording first, his voice booming across the room. She was going to ruin everything. She wouldn't stop crying. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Diane covered her face, shaking. Then the sheriff testified about the evidence, the blood on the shovel, the soil samples, the earring buried in the mud. Piece by piece, the story rebuilt itself. But the moment that silenced the room came last. The prosecutor approached the bench and said, "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence submitted by the victim's mother." He pressed play on a small device and my daughter's voice filled the courtroom. "Mom, if anything happens, don't believe them. Don't let them bury me in lies." The sound cracked in places faint under the hum of rain, but it was her, Clara, my Clara. I saw heads bow, hands tighten, tears fall. Even the judge blinked hard once. When the recording ended, the room was silent. Preston didn't move, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the floor. The prosecutor turned to him. "Mr. Webb, would you still like to claim your wife simply ran away?" He said nothing. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken. The verdict came 3 days later, guilty on all counts. Murder, fraud, evidence tampering. Diane refused to testify and the insurance company withdrew the claim. Their estate was seized. Their name became a curse whispered in pity. When the sentencing ended, I walked out into the afternoon sun, the air warm and clean. Frank was waiting by the courthouse steps. "It's done," he said simply. I nodded. "No," I whispered. "It's beginning." Because justice isn't the end of a story. It's the start of remembering without fear. That evening, I went home and placed the recorder on the kitchen table beside Clara's shoes. The blood was long dried, the leather cracked, but I couldn't throw them away. I touched them gently and whispered, "They'll never laugh at you again, baby. Now tell me, if you had to stand alone in front of the world to bring justice for someone you loved, would you do it? Would you fight when everyone told you to move on? If you would comment, Juan, if you think silence keeps peace, then like this video. But remember, this peace built on silence is just another kind of grave, and some of us were never meant to stop digging. When the trial ended, I thought the town would go quiet again the way it always does when the excitement fades and people move on to the next tragedy. But that's not what happened. Truth once spoken aloud doesn't disappear. It spreads slowly at first, then like wildfire through dry grass. The first spark came from the neighbors. Mrs. Klein, who had lived 3 houses down from the Webbs, showed up at my store one morning. She stood by the counter, twisting her wedding ring, her eyes red-rimmed. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "That night when your daughter went missing, I heard something. I told my husband it was just the wind, but it wasn't. It was screaming. I heard her screaming. The air left my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Why didn't you tell the police?" She looked at the floor. "Because they were powerful. Because I was scared." I nodded slowly. "You're telling me now. That's what matters." After she left, I sat behind the counter, hands trembling. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something heavier, quieter understanding. Fear makes good people cruel without even realizing it. Within a week, more voices joined hers. A landscaper came forward with records showing that Preston had requested late-night work on the garden 3 days after Clara disappeared. The delivery driver who'd told me about the stains on the SUV agreed to testify publicly. Even the maid who had whispered, "The walls don't like noise," gave a sworn statement describing the night she saw Preston carrying something heavy toward the back fence. Frank called it the ripple effect. I called it vindication. Each new voice was a match setting fire to the years of silence. The Webbs' reputation burned fast. The family name that once commanded respect now drew disgust. Their mansion went unsold for months, locals crossing the street rather than walk past it. No one wanted to touch what had been built on someone else's grave. News crews came to my door hungry for interviews. I didn't give them many. When I did, I spoke softly, not for attention, but for remembrance. Justice doesn't belong to me, I told them. It belongs to every woman who was told to calm down when she screamed for help. One of those interviews went viral. People began sending letters, women from other towns, other countries even. Some had lost children. Some had survived abuse and silence. They wrote things like, "Your story gave me the courage to speak up, and I thought no one would believe me either." I read every single one. Some nights I cried not from grief this time, but from the strange relief of being understood by strangers. Then one afternoon, I got a call from the local police chief, the same department that had dismissed me months before. He asked if I could come in for a meeting. When I arrived, he stood up from behind his desk, shame written all over his face. "Mrs. Webb," he said, "we failed you. There's no excuse for that." I didn't say anything. I just watched him waiting. He cleared his throat. "We're implementing a new review protocol for missing person cases. From now on, every report filed by a family member, especially a parent, gets an automatic second look. It's your case that made that happen." I nodded slowly. "Good, make it matter." He extended his hand. I hesitated before shaking it. His grip was warm, firm, and trembling slightly. Guilt, I suppose, feels heavy even when shared. The fire spread further than I expected. Local colleges invited Frank and me to speak about investigative persistence and justice. Law students took notes. Journalists asked questions about ethics and silence. Every time I told Clara's story, I watched the audience's faces, the disbelief, the horror, the quiet rage that came right before applause. It wasn't fame I wanted. It was remembrance. But the fire that warms can also burn. Not everyone was ready to face what we'd uncovered. Some said I went too far, that I should have left things alone, that revenge had no place in justice. To them, I said revenge is what you feel when the system forgets you. Justice is what you build when you remember yourself. A month after the verdict, I stood by Clara's grave as the town dedicated a small memorial garden beside the lake, the same lake where everything began. They planted wildflowers and roses the kind my daughter loved. Children played nearby, their laughter soft and pure. For once the water didn't look dark, it looked alive. Mrs. Klein came to the ceremony, tears streaking her face. She handed me a folded note. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Silence is heavier than guilt. I won't carry it anymore." That night, I went home and placed her note beside the old evidence board on my wall. I didn't take the board down even after the case was closed. I left it there as a reminder that lies aren't buried forever. They just wait for someone brave enough to dig. Frank still called often, though he'd retired for good. "You did more than get justice," he said one evening. "You changed the way people see mothers who refuse to give up." I smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I just reminded them that grief can be louder than fear. He chuckled. "You ever think about writing it all down?" "I already did," I said quietly. Every word, I just called it surviving. Now the house feels different. When I open the window at night, the wind doesn't sound like whispers anymore. It sounds like breathing, like life. So tell me, if your truth could set others free, even those you'll never meet, would you speak it, knowing it might burn everything you have left? Would you light the match anyway? If you would comment one. If you'd rather keep the peace than like this video. But remember, peace built on lies is the quiet before the next scream. And sometimes one voice is all it takes to turn that silence into fire. Justice doesn't feel like fireworks. It doesn't come with music or applause. It comes quietly like the first breeze after a storm, the kind that carries the smell of broken branches and wet earth. You breathe it in, and only then do you realize you've survived something meant to destroy you. The months after the trial passed slowly, each day peeling away another layer of noise, until all that remained was truth and silence. Preston was sentenced to life without parole. The newspapers stopped calling him the husband and started calling him the murderer. Diane sold their house, moved to another state, and disappeared into anonymity. People said she lives alone now, that she rarely leaves her home, that her roses all died the same winter he went to prison. Maybe that's justice, or maybe it's mercy wearing a cruel mask. The insurance company reached out to me, too. They'd frozen the claim during the investigation. Now they said the policy was null and void due to fraud. The money went nowhere, just like his soul. I told them to donate it to a women's shelter instead. Let something good rise from all that greed. As for me, I kept the store. People come in now not just to buy things, but to talk, to ask questions, to tell me their own stories, women especially. They tell me about husbands who control every penny, sons-in-law who silence their daughters' families, that look perfect from the outside, but smell like fear on the inside. I listen. I don't offer advice. I just listen. Because sometimes that's all someone needs to be heard before they disappear. Frank still calls once a week, usually at dusk. He says he's writing a book about unsolved cases and wants to dedicate a chapter to mine. Not because it's tragic, he said, but because it ended. He asked how I'm doing, and I told him the truth. I'm learning how to live without hate. It's harder than I thought. Hate keeps you warm when you've got nothing else. It gives you purpose. Letting it go feels like stepping out into cold air after the fire's gone out. But Clara wouldn't want me to burn forever. Some mornings, I still walk to the lake. It's quiet there now. The water reflects the sky like glass, clear and endless. I stand at the edge and throw in wildflower petals, one for every lie. I buried one for every truth that survived. The wind carries the scent of them across the water. I imagine her there, somewhere smiling that small, lopsided smile she had when she was trying not to cry. People think justice fixes everything. It doesn't. It doesn't bring back laughter or erase the smell of fear from your memory, but it steadies your heartbeat. It lets you look at your reflection again without flinching, and sometimes that's enough. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from the Department of Justice. They're naming a community initiative after Clara programs for domestic abuse prevention education grants for women rebuilding their lives. The headline read, "From Silence to Strength." I smiled when I read it. That's exactly what she'd been trying to teach her students all along. I framed the letter and hung it beside the photo of her in the butterfly field. In that picture, she's reaching out with one hand, her hair caught in the wind, chasing something beautiful she can't quite catch. I used to think that photo was about loss. Now I think it's about freedom. The town itself changed too. The police chief kept his word. There's a new division now for domestic crime investigation, mostly staffed by women. They even asked me to help train them in empathy interviews. Imagine that me, the woman they once called delusional, standing at the front of the room, teaching officers how to listen. When I speak to them, I always say the same thing. Never underestimate a mother's silence. It's not weakness. It's the sound of her sharpening her truth. Sometimes I drive past the old Webb house. The windows are boarded up, the paint peeling the garden overgrown. The roses that used to line the walkway are gone, replaced by weeds. I don't stop. I just look once and keep driving. That place doesn't belong to me anymore. It never did. My place is here behind the counter of my small store, where the bell rings softly every time the door opens, where life moves at a human pace again. I started baking again too. Pies mostly, apple, peach, sometimes blueberry. People say they taste better now. I tell them it's because I stopped using bitterness as the secret ingredient. At night, when I close up shop, I light a single candle by the photo of Clara. I don't pray for her anymore. I talk to her like she's just out back, sorting through the books she loved to lend to her students. I tell her about the day, about the letters, about the women who found courage because of her story. And sometimes, when the flame flickers, I imagine she's listening. Now tell me, if justice came at the cost of your peace, would you still chase it? Would you walk through the fire knowing you'd never come back the same? If you would comment one, if you'd rather stay safe, then like this video. But remember, this peace without truth is only silence waiting to start over again. And I, for one, have learned to live with the noise. It's been a year since the trial, and sometimes when the morning light spills across my kitchen table, I forget for half a second that the world ever broke. The coffee percolates, the air smells of cinnamon, the clock ticks the same steady rhythm it did before everything fell apart. For that small sliver of time, life feels untouched. Then I see her shoes on the shelf, the same white pair I could never throw away, and the illusion fades. But now it doesn't hurt. It reminds me. The lake has changed too. Every spring, wildflowers bloom along the edge, turning the water line into a ribbon of color. The town comes together once a year for what they call the Clara Walk. It's not a parade, just people walking the old trail in silence, carrying candles that flicker against the dusk. Some walk for her, some walk for their own ghosts, and when they pass me, they nod, not out of pity anymore, but respect. I walk at the end always. Not because I'm behind, but because that's where the view is clearest, the light stretching ahead like a path for the living and the dead alike. Every year when we reach the dock, someone reads her final voicemail out loud. The first time I couldn't bear to hear it. Now I can. Her voice doesn't sound frightened anymore. It sounds brave. After the walk, I always go home and write her a letter. Not to the girl who died, but to the woman she became through all this. I tell her about the garden I planted behind the store lilies, lavender, rosemary. I tell her about the college scholarship fund in her name, about the girl from 2 towns over who used it to study law, saying she wants to make sure no one's story gets rewritten again. I tell Clara that her words traveled farther than she ever could have imagined. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven him. Preston, the man who took everything and lost it all. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. Forgiveness feels too small, too easy. What I've done is simpler. I've stopped carrying him. The weight of hate is heavy, and I was tired of dragging his ghost behind me. Let him rot where he belongs in the dark corners he built for himself. Diane wrote me once, months after his sentencing, a short letter, polite, trembling. She said, "I don't expect you to answer. I only want you to know that I loved your daughter too, in my own flawed way." I never wrote back. Some apologies are just another way of asking to forget, and forgetting is something I refuse to do. Instead, I remember. Every day in small ways. I remember by keeping the store open, by greeting people with kindness, by saying Clara's name out loud whenever I can. I remember by helping women who come through my door trembling with the same fear I once knew. I tell them, "You're not crazy. You're just early. The world hasn't caught up to your truth yet." Sometimes at night, I dream of her. Not the way she died, but the way she lived, standing barefoot in the kitchen, humming to herself as she baked sunlight spilling across her hair. In the dream, she always turns to me and says, "See, Mom, it's okay now." And I believe her, because for the first time in years, it is. I've learned that closure isn't about endings. It's about beginnings that finally have room to breathe. The garden behind the store has become that space for me. When the wind passes through the flowers, it sounds like voices, soft, layered, endless. Sometimes I think I hear her laugh in them. A young woman came by last week, one of Clara's former students. She's grown now, confident, carrying a baby on her hip. She told me, "Your daughter used to say stories are the only way we live forever." I think she was right. Then she handed me a drawing the child had made, a simple one, stick figures holding hands under a blue sky. On the back, she'd written, "For the woman who didn't stop digging." I hung it in the window of the store. It makes people smile when they come in. Sometimes they ask if it's mine, and I just say, "In a way, yes." I visit the cemetery less often now, not because I've forgotten, but because she's no longer there. She's everywhere: the wind, the voices, the stories that refuse to die. I used to think her death ended everything I knew about love. Now I understand it only changed its form. Love is the echo that outlives the scream. On quiet nights, I sit on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and talk to her the way I used to. I tell her about the day the customers, the new flowers blooming near the fence. I tell her I'm proud of her, and before I go inside, I whisper, "We did it." Because we did. We turned horror into history. We turned loss into legacy. We turned silence into something that finally speaks. Now tell me, if the world buried your truth beneath lies, would you keep digging until your hands bled? Would you face every whisper, every doubt, every door slammed in your face just to make sure the truth had a heartbeat again if you would comment one? If you'd rather stay quiet, then like this video. But remember, this silence may protect comfort, but only truth protects dignity. And dignity, once found, never dies.